All right, so we're live on Instagram. Let's see if we can get it to work on Facebook, and it's working this week. That's beautiful. Hello, welcome to Homestead Healing. My name is Laura Ann. I am your heart and healing mentor. I have a different setup today with the phone and computer, so hopefully you can see and hear me on both. If it feels like you can't, please let me know. If you're watching, there's a new setup on live Facebook, so go ahead and just say what's up in the comments so I know you're there. And if you have any questions, just speak right on up. So, as a heart and healing mentor, it is my honor to hold your hand, give you some insight and some light on your healing path. I work with empaths to help them overcome emotional overwhelm so that they can thrive in the life of their dreams. I know some about that myself because I am an empath. I am a highly sensitive person. And over the last several years on my own healing journey, I've come to see what a huge impact that in and of itself has had on the way that I understand myself, relate to the world, and some specific needs that I have on my own to thrive in my own life. But today I wanted to talk about something called shadow work. And I touched on it last week. Last week we talked about archetypes and inner child work, and specifically working with the wounded child and the orphan child archetypes. And we touched on what shadow work is within that live video, which is on my YouTube channel. And it's also still up on my Facebook page and in my story highlights on Instagram if you're interested. But I got some questions from folks about shadow work, and in general, I've just been feeling really called to talk about it because I've been doing a lot of work in that area. And it always seems to be that, at least for myself as a healer, I'm really drawn to sharing and teaching things that I have found personally to be of great value. Oh, hey, Henry. It's great to see you. I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for joining. Um, so, shadow work. What is a shadow? It is a term that comes from Jungian psychology, and Carl Jung sort of coined the phrase in relation to the ego, which we'll get to in a minute. But when you think of a shadow, this is just my kind of personal take on it, and from my own experience as a healer and in my own healing journey. When you think about light and dark, there's this dichotomy of light and dark, when in reality, they're really two sides of the same coin. And I think that's really important to remember. It's one of the things I work with clients around is this idea of positive and negative energy. There is no positive or negative energy except for the label with which we assign a specific energetic vibration because of the way that it affects us and the way that it affects our environment. So humans love labels. It's how we learn to understand ourselves, identify ourselves, separate ourselves between our inner and outer environments. It's how we understand the world around us. It's very useful. It's a big part of how language came about, was to say, this is that, I am me, you are you. And so, it does have its uses, but I think it can take you a little too far into believing what those labels are, if that makes any sense. So just because something is dark doesn't mean that it's bad. And you need to have dark in order to understand what light is, and you need to have light to understand what dark is, right? So they're in relationship with one another. And, in my own healing work, for me, I think of it as it's all energy. It's all different vibrations. If you were to look at, if we're thinking about the analogy of light and dark, with the way that we see things, the wavelengths that we're able to interpret with our eyes, the wavelengths are going to look very different between the light and the dark side of the spectrum. That doesn't mean that the longer wavelengths are bad and the shorter wavelengths are good. It just means that they're different. And so that's something that's really valuable for me as an insight when doing shadow work, because as a culture we have a tendency to be afraid of the dark, right? And the hidden. And we could write a thesis on that, but it's really true and evident at very varying levels of society and culture. So I like to think of like a pop cultural analogy to this when you think about Star Wars. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I love Star Wars. And you think about, the Jedi versus the Sith, right? The dark side of the Force. It's this ominous thing. And I think that's very much an old dichotomy. And in Star Wars lore, there's something called the Grey Jedi. And the Grey Jedi is able to use both sides of the Force. And the definition of good or bad isn't in whether or not it's the light side of the Force or the dark side of the Force that you're using. It's to what purpose you're using it for. And so when we think about shadow work, I like to say, let's strive to be the Gray Jedi, where it's not all black and white. It's not this, one side is pure good, one side is pure evil. It's that we're integrated and incorporating all parts of our energetic self into a whole, cohesive whole. And that's going to be where we really start to see deep, true healing and awareness. And that kind of leads us really nicely into what the shadow is. The shadow is everything the ego is not. In Jungian psychology, the ego is the stuff that we're really proud of, right? The ego, walks into a room and knows that they're the most attractive, most capable person in that room, right? The ego is that part of us that strives to win, that wants to compete. It's all the elements within ourselves that we want to claim, that we're proud of, that we champion, that we identify with as ourself, that we think and feel are the good parts of ourself that we have no problem looking at and that we exhibit to the world. The shadow side of self, the shadow self, are all of the things that are a part of us that we don't want to look at. And it's really interesting when you're born, you're just this blank slate, right? You're just sweet, open consciousness, and there's no understanding of what good and bad are. It's something that we learn through witnessing our primary caregivers and through interacting with them and our environment. So for example, as a kid, if you drop something on the ground and you get fussed at or scolded for making a mess, you understand making a mess is bad. And if I'm constantly clumsy and making messes, or and I get scolded on, maybe I'm bad, and so being messy is bad, and I'm messy, so that means I'm bad. And that's just one sort of surface level example of how we start to understand what parts of us are good and what parts of us are bad. It goes so deep and so far in the way that we understand ourselves and the way that we understand the world around us. So, things that you believe are bad within yourself, you tend to, because you can't look at it, you start to project it outwards onto other people. And so that's, I think, a pretty common understanding that we've heard before of people, oh, they're just projecting on you. Well, that's where that comes from. It's the idea that because there are these shadow sides of ourselves that we can't and don't want to see, that then what starts to happen is our shadow self subconsciously tries to get us to look at it. It's like, look at me, look at me. And so it starts to project itself outward onto other people. And so it is true that very often the traits that drive you the most crazy from other people are exactly the things that drive you most crazy about yourself. Not always, but very frequently. There's definitely a huge vein of truth there. So how do we do shadow work? It is really at its root introspection. I find that journaling is a really great tool for this, of just feeling into things that are uncomfortable. If there's a really good time to journal and to try to bring your shadow forward into your conscious mind is after you've had an argument, after you've had some kind of situation that doesn't feel good, where you feel kind of icky about yourself, rather than trying to blame somebody else or justify standing your ground or I'm right or whatever it is, really to sink into that discomfort around the icky. And journaling can be a really great practice for that, and just kind of, feeling into, why do I feel this way? Why did I react this way? What is going on for myself at a deeper level? This is not a practice that you're used to. It can feel very overwhelming. How to approach shadow work can feel like, well, if I don't want to look at my shadow and I haven't looked at it my whole life, how am I supposed to start now? Where do I start? That's where archetypes can be very, very helpful. And I mentioned them, in the live video last week. Carl Jung really archetypes have been around forever. Since the time of Plato, but Carl Jung really brought them forward in the social science of psychology, and really understanding, our inner scapes. And Carolyn Myss has built a lot on that work, and I really love her work around archetypes. So her website is a great resource. That's Carolyn Myss, Myss, and I'm going to be doing more work around archetypes as well moving forward. But basically, within each archetype, you have the light and the shadow present, and it helps you to begin to understand how the shadow manifests within yourself. So, for example, if you're the wounded child, a shadow of the wounded child, there's a tendency to have self-pity and to blame other people for your own hurt. That actually shows up as well in the victim archetype. So if you start to feel like you're gravitating or resonating with certain archetypes, then you can use that archetype to get a better understanding of what the shadow is. But essentially, just to wrap up, because this is a very sort of surface level dive on what shadow work is, the shadow is everything about yourself that you don't want to claim and that you don't want to look at. And in order to really heal yourself at all levels, you have to look at the shadow. You can't just look at the light. I think working with the light is very powerful. It can be great, especially if you feel like you're in a really dark place. But the way to truly heal something is to go through it. And so I have found, honestly, when I'm in the dark, doing shadow work can actually be much more powerful than working with the light. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I was going to tell you something else. What was it? Shadow work, the dichotomy of light and dark. I didn't write it in my notes. It was something that came up while I was talking to you. Well, it must not have been that important because it's gone out of my mind. Nope. It's gone. If I think about it, I'll post it in the comments of the video. But I hope this has been helpful. I'll be diving deeper into what shadow work is in the coming days and weeks, because I think it's really important. I've also got some projects that I'm working on that I'll be excited to share with you. If you're interested in subscribing to my email list, I highly recommend it. I'm constantly updating the free gifts that I have online. And so the one I have right now is on inner child healing, which is a very powerful tool as well. So my website is homesteadhealingatx.com. Go online and subscribe there to receive your free audio training and just stay up to date on all the fun things and helpful things that I'm working on now. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, my handle is @homesteadhealing, and on Facebook, I'm Laura Ann Gilpin, and my business page is Homestead Healing. So it's been just a joy to create some space to talk a little bit about this with you today. You can always reach out to me, slide into my direct messages, or you can email me, laura@homesteadhealingatx.com. Thank you for joining me today. I'm sending you out into the rest of your week with just so much love and light and peace. Namaste.